Fabulous. That's it.
Right.
It's a wrap.
That's one for each, said to the other.
Right, shush. Well, after a much-needed week's break from an intense Canadian Grand Prix, the F1 circus heads back across the Atlantic for the Austrian Grand Prix in the beautiful hills of Spielberg. And joining me to preview the weekend, both in the studio, this is fantastic, is our tech head, Jake Boxall-Legge. That's apparently what we're calling you this week, so fantastic. And the one and only Stuart Codling, who stepped in for me last time we had a preview, so thank you very much for that. How are we, gents?
Yeah, not too bad, thank you. Looking forward to... Austria's always good fun, isn't it? So should be a good race, I think.
I'm much better than I was last week when I stepped in for you with a heavy cold and I sounded like a member of the Labour Party front bench. So the poor listener would have had to put up with... and now it's an unprecedented opportunity for the British economy.
Well, I don't really know what to say to that. We'll move swiftly on, shall we? We'll start with some of the news items and then we'll get into the Red Bull Ring itself. So, Jake, first of all, because I know you like keeping tabs on Williams. James Vowles has just signed a long-term contract with the team, which will keep him there for the foreseeable future. So, how do you think his tenure has gone so far? Pretty promising, surely.
Yeah, certainly. It's been impressive. And I think the good thing as well is, and you don't really often hear about when a new team principal comes in, what their plans are for a certain team. You kind of go, you see a new person come in, they'll kind of see what everything's like and then they'll make their judgment. But there's been a very, very clear plan since Vowles came to the team in 2023. Obviously, he'd been in the Mercedes infrastructure for so long. Had seen how kind of Williams was working. I guess he'd kind of already come to that conclusion himself, but he'd seen how Williams had been working for the opening few months of his tenure and gone, there's a lot that's outdated here and it needs a lot of investment. And so with that experience, he's been able to kind of guide that investment. And I don't think that's something that the previous incumbent, Jost Capito, had been able to do. He'd come from a sort of different kind of motorsport environment, sort of being involved with Volkswagen Motorsport in rally and stuff like that. So maybe his knowledge of Formula One was less contemporary, let's say. So for Vowles, he's been able to get into the team, move the resource, move that investment, move the money into various areas that has needed it the most. So I think composites facility, a lot of manufacturing facilities needed updating. One of the things that he did as well was push the change to the capital expenditure caps for the teams lower down the grid, so Williams would get a little bit more budget to essentially update everything that it needed. So I think when you look at it so far and the uptick in results, which he doesn't necessarily put down to any sort of great improvement in, it's not been a huge change. It's more just this continual updating of the facilities, of the processes of the team, and it's just sort of been a natural byproduct of that, and that's why Williams is in such a decent place this season. So I think you have to, only extol the merits of his tenure so far.
Yeah, it's got to have been a no-brainer for Williams to keep him on. But Stuart, what's next? So they've kind of arguably moved to the front of the midfield so far in 2025. So what's the next target? What should we be expecting from Williams over the next 6 months, year, 18 months?
This is the tricky one, isn't it? Because he's been very good, as James Vowles, at conspicuously doing a good job. He's very statesman-like in all his pronouncements. You got the feeling under the previous management that there was a little bit too much clunking fist and not enough velvet glove. And James seems to be able to manage those two. And in public, at least, it's all characterised by stability. And he's able to frame the Williams narrative as if everything is proceeding according to some great plan. And at the moment, we have this business that they're pivoting early towards 2026 development, rowing back on, bothering with the 2025 car. Small element of peril with that, isn't there? Because they're probably doing a little bit better than they expected this season. And of course, if you say, oh, well, we're pivoting towards next season, you could end up in that situation BMW found themselves in 2009 with an absolutely terrible car, and that sort of horrible lingering knowledge that they were kind of in with a shout at the 2008 championship.
So they were actually in a championship fight at the time, weren't they?
Yeah.
So you can imagine why Robert Kubica wasn't too pleased. Obviously, he's just won Le Mans, so he's in a much better place at the moment. But,
So you can get it very wrong when you do that. And then the question we'll have to ask ourselves is, how will James reframe the narrative if we're not proceeding according to the great plan, or the great plans had to pivot a little bit? Are we going to end up in Cyril Abiteboul territory, where the 5-year plan becomes a 6-year one, then a 7-year one, then we never actually said when the 5-year plan was starting?
Well, it's always more difficult to get to that last little bit, isn't it? He's doing the easier gains now. He's done them, you could say, and now gets to some more tricky bits. But from one team that's sort of heading in the right direction to one that we're not sure whether they are, pretty up and down. So Renault CEO Luca De Meo has left to become Kering's new CEO. So what do we think, Jake, that this could mean for Alpine? I mean, it's yet another change of senior management personnel. There's a lot of turmoil still, it appears, going on there.
Well, you would have to say that most of this change has come under De Meo's watch. That's the thing. I'll be honest, I kind of don't know what to make of it, because it just seems to be, there's another change, and now we've got the news that Steve Nielsen is potentially taking over as what is being billed as team manager, so not quite team principal, more of a kind of, take football as an example. There are a lot of people that we consider managers in the Premier League that aren't actually managers. They're called head coach, because they have a director of football above them that's actually sort of working on the player signings and various things like that. And Flavio is now kind of in this director of football, executive advisor, or whatever he's billed as now. And so we've got Nielsen coming in as essentially the head coach. For De Meo to leave, just to sort of bring it back to the topic, again, I don't know what this means for Briatore, because he was the one that brought him in, and as a divisive character, he might not necessarily be to the taste of whoever follows De Meo in the door next. It depends whether Group Renault sort of follows, essentially promoting the people that De Meo liked and had put in senior positions, and so you would have that sort of continuity. I think Colin's probably better equipped to talk about this than me, but otherwise, I don't know. I just feel like as a team, it will just, it'll keep changing, but it will keep sort of occupying largely the sort of same space on the grid. So I don't actually see in the long run great change.
Well, Stuart, does it mean the sale of the team is more or less likely? Should we go down that path?
I might have written something about the whole situation on .com last week, and a potential sale of the team has got a bit closer. De Meo did say that he was the one thing standing in between the sale or otherwise. He says he's a supporter of the team. He's definitely been an agent of massive change. And they've gone through so many managers there. I think there are so many bodies buried under the floorboards at Enston that they would probably be better off getting Dennis Nielsen in as sporting director or whatever, rather than Steve Nielsen. And it's been a process of change. And De Meo, you can tell, did great things at Renault Group in terms of the cars they build. They're more exciting. The model lineup's better. He obviously had the vision that Alpine should be a sporting sub-brand that actually had a product, whereas when he came in, there was nothing left in the tank. He had the idea to rebrand the F1 team as Alpine. All good ideas. And then we've had this ridiculous torrent of managers. You had Laurent Rossi, who notionally put in charge of that and clearly had no idea how to run an F1 team. I think an Easter egg would have done a better job running an F1 team than him. It just goes to show that you should have people running teams that actually know about Formula One, rather than turning up with MBAs and paper qualifications and thinking they know everything. And everyone they've put in since hasn't been given enough time to bed in. Otmar Safnauer had, a year, 18 months, and then off you go. Quite ridiculous, actually. And people who are in senior management roles in the car industry, of all things, which has long product cycles, should know that you can't change things instantly. And I think maybe people look at Formula One from outside and say, hey, it's a fast-moving sport and, change from week to week and it's dynamic, etc., etc. To an extent it is, but it's still very process-driven running an F1 team, and you can't turn it around overnight. And also, change has to be incremental, and you can't find... Everyone who designs an F1 car knows that you don't find 0.3 of a second down the back of a sofa when you put a new front wing on. Everything's scientifically measured. It's incremental process, small gains, and a lot of people come into management and don't really understand that.
Yeah. The days of bolting a fan onto the car and just making it go massively faster overnight have long since gone, haven't they? Well, let's look at the driver market briefly as well. So, Jake, the rumours swirling that Aston Martin are going to have made a serious play for George Russell, who still hasn't got his new Mercedes contract at the time we're recording this. So, do you think George Russell could leave Mercedes? And which seat would he take? I mean, it would be Fernando's, presumably, because I assume Lance Stroll is going to be there until Lawrence gets bored. Is that fair?
I think the way I see it is, and this is probably the simplest explanation, is it's not entirely... you would call that Aston Martin lineup relatively dynamic. I'm sure they've both got their buyout clauses. Stroll's on a rolling deal, and if they wanted to get rid of him, they probably could. It's sort of... Obviously, we expect him to be in that car for a very, very long time, Lance Stroll, but at the same time, it's sort of Schrodinger's seat. It's available until it isn't, essentially.
Schrodinger's seat.
Or until you open the cake tin.
Yeah. And I think Russell wants this new Mercedes deal. I think he wants to get it done. But because there's this notional seat at Aston Martin available, he can use that to kind of drive up his contract value a little bit, because he knows that Mercedes has tried to court Max Verstappen before. Knows that Toto Wolff still sort of has interest in, at some point, bringing Verstappen to the team. So Russell's trying to maybe feather his own nest a little bit and go, well, there's an Aston Martin say, I'm sure it's very lucrative. So if you could just, pop a couple more million on the end of that contract and, we'll be hunky-dory. Both sides say they don't want to play any games with it, but I don't believe that everybody's going to. It's Formula One. They just do that. It's just in their nature. I would be surprised if it happened, to be honest with you. I think he'll sign that Mercedes deal and he'll stay there. But, because because an Aston Martin is potentially on the table, he's going to use that to his advantage.
Do you think he'll stay at Mercedes?
Yeah, some of the gossip around this has been quite intriguing, because it's essentially it turns out that one of the main person hawking around this story that Aston have made a play for George Russell is Christian Horner, and the main reading of it is that it's actually just nonsense put about by Horner to caused Toto Wolff a small amount of aggro.
No, that would never happen. What are you saying?
So yeah, I think we can file that in the round, the round filing cabinet. I'm sure nothing will come of it. You can we can clip this and we can put it about on social media when I'm proved wrong, and and next week when the grand move of George Russell to Aston Martin is announced, we can say, okay, right, well, fine, I'm wrong. But yeah, at the moment, my understanding is that it is sort of nonsense being put around by Christian Horner, just out of mischief, because he's got enough on his plate and he wants to direct a little bit of heat other people's way.
Indeed, fair enough. Well, I know, Jake, you're not hugely wanting to answer questions about tyres all the time. We are just going to cover it off briefly. The C6, new for this season, has it really done what it's supposed to do? Is it too close to the C5?
I think yes and no. It's made qualifying quite interesting because although, yes, it is very, very close to the C5, and I think the delta at races that it's been at has been about a tenth and a half. Actually, it's created a sort of dual strategy for qualifying, which I actually quite enjoyed, because it's not clear which the best tyre is. Because do you go for the C6 and have the outright best performance, or do you have the C5 and have potentially stronger performance through the entire lap? And so on the C6, is it a little bit more prudent to kind of give up the performance in the first sector and hang on to it for the last part of the lap, or do you take it out and take the performance out of it, use the tyre life up, and then at the end of the lap maybe sort of hang on a little bit? It sort of prompts the teams to think about it laterally, which I quite like.
It probably depends on the car that you've got underneath you
it
as well.
certainly does, absolutely. And I think if you're a little bit more prone to taking life out of the tyres, you take that C5 and go for it. If you're a little bit lighter on them, you can take the C6, and it's a slightly less obvious qualifying session. It's not a race tyre for sure. I don't think you could ever. It's when you have it on the menu, it's almost guaranteed you won't see it in the race. But at the same time, in the event of late race safety car, then maybe you take a set, or it kind of remains to be seen what effect it might have in that situation, because we didn't really get a last couple of laps shootout in Canada. But I think, it shakes things up. I do agree that the delta between the two tyre types could be bigger, especially if you want to sort of have it as an opportunity, I don't know, for the race. Again, you would have more performance at the end of the race in like maybe a 3-4 lap safety car shootout with this tyre that's potentially, 0.3, 0.4 second quicker than what is the faster tyre. But at the same time, I really like this sort of, kind of dual qualifying strategy split. So I'm a little bit torn. I think it's okay as it is. I think it could go a little bit harder, but again, I like the where it is at the moment.
Yeah, so it's not going in the bin just yet.
Not anytime soon, actually.
No.
Although maybe for Singapore, that was one of the things that eventuated from the Pirelli British media lunch on Friday, was that they may not actually take it to Singapore because the conditions and the track a bit too aggressive. But there was a sort of a tacit acknowledgement that it hasn't actually delivered the effect that Pirelli wanted, but it has had some sort of an effect, so they're going to bank that as a success while trying to make sure that next year they change it so that it actually has the effect that they wanted.
So very much halfway house like JBL's answer then, essentially,
it is
right?
very much a halfway house. They brought in the C6 because they wanted to have tyres step softer for the race, so you would have, certainly at the circuits where you'd bring the C6, the C5 would previously have been the softest option there, and that was a tyre that no one wanted to do much of a stint on. So they were kind of pushing people more towards two-stop strategies. But then two things happened this year. One is that Pirelli acted on the target letter they were given and made the tyres less sensitive to thermal degradation. So what's happened is that we've had more one-stop races because tyres you previously wouldn't have gone for a long stint on, all of a sudden, suddenly they are working for much longer. So the C5 becomes a more viable race tyre. And then you have this thing Jake alluded to, that the C6 isn't meaningfully quicker than the C5 and doesn't last very long either. So in terms of the actual difference in pace, they say it's 0.2 at best. Pirelli said it needs to be half a second, not 0.2. That's what they're working on for next year. And then you have the behaviour of the tyre. It moves around too much on the block, so the drivers say it just feels a bit weird, and the peak happens very quickly, and then it falls off quite sharply. So it needs to be less peaky, faster, slightly longer living. But that's not going to happen this year. It's a thing for next year.
You kind of wonder how they're going to do that. They want it to be sort of slightly less, literally soft, but also be faster. It's like, well, do you want to make them out of camembert or something? Like, what's the plan?
Maybe have a C7.
Yeah, it seems like they want to have their cake.
No, C6. Just go from the C5 to the C7.
I will just add that in Canada it was actually quite fun to kind of see the strategy split. Again, it wasn't like a direct two-stopper, but I like that when you've got the one-stop versus two. If you can sort of make the one-stop happen, you've got the track position. But I like it when there's not certainty, there's not 100% everybody going for the same thing. It's nice to have a mix of strategy.
Yeah, that's fair. That's why it was disappointing that Charles Leclerc didn't get to do his one-stop strategy that he wanted to do. Even if it had worked out in the end, it would have been fun to watch. But let's look ahead to the Red Bull Ring at last. That is actually the race we're going to have this weekend. I'm going to come back to you, Stuart. So McLaren looked potentially at its most vulnerable in Canada. Do we think that was a Montreal-specific problem and they'll be back to... I mean, they were still quick in the race, to be fair. It's not like they were suddenly woefully off, but what can we expect? Do we think that that's the sign of things to come, or is it more of a Montreal-specific thing?
Quick enough for one driver to go into the back of another while going for a gap that didn't exist.
Well, that's against another McLaren, though, so I mean, it doesn't
Blue on
affect
blue
how we are
action.
relative to the other cars.
Yeah, I think that was probably one of these circuit-specific things, as we've seen previously this season. There are condition-specific things and circuit-specific things that affect the balance of performance, and sometimes you get circuits where Red Bull's car thrives, other times it doesn't. The Red Bull Ring, very peculiar circuit with lots of short radius corners. We've seen both McLaren and Red Bull strong there in the past. In actual fact, I seem to recall reading something Jake wrote this very day about this being a crunch race for Norris on a couple of previous occasions. So I think we can expect kind of it to be close between them again.
Yeah, I mean, it's Piastri's been inconsistent. Lando's shown that Norris shown that he can be faster, but making too many errors. That seems to be the developing story of the season. But assuming that they are up at the front as we expect, Jake, who's going to be sort of in the mix with them? The Red Bull Ring's kind of flat out blast. Braking's important. So who can we expect to be up there at the front as well?
So you would look at this and go, this isn't a circuit that would suit Red Bull because these kind of short radius corners haven't been particularly good for the RB21. But again, ever trying to predict that Max Verstappen won't be in contention is kind of a little bit folly. Like he will be there for sure. And I think as much as Red Bull kind of likes to make a big thing of its weaknesses and go, we're only good in the
what do you mean?
long radius, medium, high speed corners. The fact of the matter is that Max can put it in, put it up towards the top end of the grid in any race, really. It depends how hot it is, because the last few years, Austria's actually been maybe not less so last year. It was actually weather was a bit mixed last year, as I recall. But the last few years, generally, it's been quite hot, sort of the heights of summer. And so every time you kind of consider the temperature is sort of pushing slightly over the 30-degree centigrade mark, Mercedes is kind of less in the race. Now, Canada, actually, it did all right, but I don't expect it to maybe quite have the same, strength of weekend. Russell was by far the sort of Russell and Mercedes. That was the best combination, I think, in Canada. But it should be warmer in Austria, and so I would not be sort of willing to say that Russell's going to repeat his is basically picking up the pieces victory from last year. I don't think that's quite on the cards. I think it will be McLaren, Verstappen, Mercedes might be in it, and Ferrari, I don't even know at this point.
Neither do they. Sadly,
it could go anyway, couldn't it?
It's. They seem to go, oh no, we know what we have a picture of our strengths, and then the performances at the track seem to completely defy what it thinks its strengths are. I think it's just, I don't know. I don't know where Ferrari are. They might be in it, might be not. I don't know.
So Nico Hulkenberg victory then is what
it could happen, and then of course you have the weird phenomenon of track limits, which is always a topic at this circuit. Maybe a little bit less so now that they've tweaked the way they measure it and there's a bit more gravel around various corners. But I think it's a fundamental problem with this circuit. It's a very strange place, the Red Bull Ring, and that's all because before Red Bull bought pretty much all the land in that particular corner of Styria, a lot of the land surrounding the circuit, and including the circuit itself, was owned by different landowners and farmers. And when it was redeveloped as the A1 Ring in the 1990s, those people got greedy and said, well, we want X amount of money for you to use this land. So what happened is the circuit shrank to avoid having to pay these people money. And you have these corners that are just sort of slightly too kind of tight. People are tempted to, they push as far as they can in terms of what they can get away with. The Jochen Rindt curve infamously is one of those. One of the major corners that shrank as a result of, Herr Klaus who owned the farm next door, getting a bit too greedy.
Well, I think the airstrike ring, which is what you're referring to, what it was
Yeah.
before, would probably be too fast for modern F1 cars
Yes.
now. So it would probably have ended up getting butchered anyway, probably. And at least, I guess, with the A1 ring and Red Bull ring, as we know it now, you do normally get some good racing. Now, before we finish, we've got to talk about Max Verstappen, and this is his last race before he loses points off his licence. So he needs to avoid a penalty for one more weekend. Obviously, he picked up a couple of the points that he's got with Lando Norris, with actually, even by Max Verstappen's standards, quite a minor nerf at the Austrian Grand Prix last year. So can we expect more gamesmanship that upsets Christian Horner, largely from George Russell? Anyone else going to get in on the act, do we think?
I'm not sure if a minor nerf carries a tariff, a specific tariff in the
I'm
sporting
not
regulations.
quoting from the sporting regulations there. Paraphrasing.
Well, I have to say, a lot of the foolishness in the aftermath of the Canadian Grand Prix could have been avoided if Red Bull's management or the whole organisation had not been looking through that situation at the end of the race through the optics of having decided that Russell was deliberately trying to goad Verstappen into doing something stupid. They looked at the onboards and thought, well, it's clearly the case he's trying to get Max to pick up a penalty. And a further investigation revealed, the data revealed that he was driving to a delta. It was the safety car that was being driven erratically, amusingly enough. And race control could see that. That's why they wouldn't have escalated that matter to the stewards in the first place. And of course, the whole issue wasn't heard until about 4 hours after the race, because there were several other actual safety car infractions that had to be looked at first.
So what you're saying is that Red Bull need to put the protest in before the race,
Yes.
just fill in the blanks when they decide what it is. Less facetiously, Jay, you suggested that there should be maybe a bigger, not fine, but a fee or something to put people off making fairly unnecessary protests.
Yes.
Which I think most people would support, but I guess until such a thing happens, there's a danger that we're going to get more of this sort of nonsense.
Well, because the current fee is that it's €2,000 to submit your protest, and as long as it conforms to, I think it's Article 13 of the International Sporting Code, stating what is admissible for a penalty, as long as you can say, oh, this happened and that refers to this subsection here, then you're, in theory, you can submit your protest. So it's quite a low bar. And I think they submitted it on the grounds that it was unsportsmanlike conduct from Russell. And the inference was that he'd looked in his mirrors to try and brake check Verstappen. There was the other thing as well, which they'd originally submitted the protest for, which was for being more than 10 car lengths behind the safety car. But then they withdrew that sort of section. So essentially it hinged entirely on the unsportsmanlike conduct. And at that point, it's then only a matter of interpretation, because Russell said, well, I was looking in my mirrors to see where he was because I didn't want to brake in front of him. I wanted to make sure that he was to the side of me before he slammed on the brakes for the safety car. So at that point, it's just like, well, you've submitted something that's entirely conditional on whether somebody believes a subjective point of view on a situation. And that's not how Formula One should be played. And
Schrodinger's protest.
another win for Schrodinger. Oh God. So that's the point. And it's not about, because I think when I wrote that piece, I made the mistake of looking through the online comments and we're going, you wouldn't have written this if the boot was on the other foot. Absolutely, I would have done, because this isn't a matter of which drivers it affects and
or which team's involved.
Yeah.
It's a principal thing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
We've seen it in other categories as well.
And you can't just, if you disagree with something, you can't protest every single thing. And I think that's why you've got to work out which battles to fight, essentially. And I think my thought is that if Jonathan Wheatley was still at Red Bull, would that have gone through? Would he have said, okay, this is one that we need to fight? I don't believe that it would have done. I think there would have been a little bit more due diligence to kind of say, okay, well, I think this is a little bit too subjective and this is not something that's necessarily provable. So let's save that €2,000 and put it aside for a rainy day. the point about making the fees bigger is, it was suggested by Zach Brown, which is essentially it's got to be a fee that has an effect that, you know, makes it so that you can't bring that extra front wing to a race. It's got to be something that you're so sure of that you will put that money down and you'll risk it to make your point in the steward's room. Because €2,000, that's, you know, that's what some sandwiches. Although Red Bull's fallen foul of that before, allegedly.
That's expensive sandwiches.
So
Yeah, sandwiches from the bottom of the list.
It's got to be something that you've got to feel that, and that gives you the sense that, do I want to go and fight this battle or do I not? That's the bottom line of it here.
I think it shouldn't just be a monetary thing. So yeah, by all means, escalate the amount that has to be paid as a deposit for a protest, but also there should be an element of forfeit and peril as well. So I don't know, if you file a completely fatuous protest and it's turned down, you have to go and do the washing up in the FIA's hospitality afterwards or something like that.
I thought you were going to come up with something really draconian then, but no, it was, we were keeping it light. I mean, before we finish off, Stuart, could we see this protest really as a part of a strategy that Red Bull are employing at the moment to basically protect Max Verstappen from himself and try and deflect it away because he's so close to the ban? Or is it a more indicative of a deeper problem that they're in a little bit of a spin and actually without Verstappen, they can't get the second car to score significant points? He's obviously not very happy and he's hauling it round. Like, let's fair play to him. Like, he keeps putting the car arguably where it shouldn't be. So yeah, is it indicative of a strategy or chaos, if that makes sense?
I wouldn't dignify it with the term strategy. I think the problem that team has is that there's this pervasive attitude that comes from the top, which is us versus the world, this whole sort of embattled, everyone's against us. And it's something that Christian Horner, it has to be said, stokes with the online community. You know, he weaponises the bottom half of the internet and the bottom half of the media, frankly, to fight his battles for him when he's unable to make a legal case for them. And you see it time after time. You see it in the radio communications between GP and Max. You know, GP will feed Max this sense of it, of you know, it's us versus them. They're bullying you again, Max. You know, he stokes Max's anger sometimes. So they're actually getting what they've paid for when Max sort of does something daft and picks up a penalty. Half the time, I mean, perhaps even more than half the time, it is because of that pressure and they fed his anger, when instead they should be sort of not even doing that at all. And so to my mind, they're kind of reaping what they've sown. I'm starting to reach very deeply into my bag of cliches here, but yes, it's their attitude that it's the culture. It permeates all the communications, the outward communications, the inward communications, us versus the world. We're put upon, everyone's biased against us, and it's very subjective. And as Jake found when he dared to write about the matter, everyone who comments about it is entirely subjective as well. You know, it's very much John Inverdale's sunglasses.
It would be interesting to see Verstappen in a different environment, actually. I mean, that's an interesting point, is to see if he was to move team, would he actually calm down and find it easier not to pick up penalty points? Obviously, we are some way away from that. Well, thanks very much, gents. That's just about it for our Austrian Grand Prix preview. Be sure to visit autosport.com for all the news and updates as the weekend unfolds. And we'll be back next week to both review the Red Bull Ring and preview the big one for British fans, the British Grand Prix at Silverstone. Until then, thanks for watching.